My name is Sheila Saibi, and I work as a leader in the Comcast Open Source Program Office. Comcast creates incredible technology and entertainment that connects millions of people to the moments and experiences that matter most. Our engineering teams are focused on transforming what's possible in entertainment and connectivity. They work together to create the platforms, hardware, and software that enable Comcast to quickly deploy incredible new products, apps, and experiences to our customers and our syndication partners around the world. We are proud supporters of the Philadelphia tech community, and it's an honor to sponsor today's event. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Elizabeth Adams, a Forbes 15 AI ethics leader showing the world the way of the future. Elizabeth is a highly sought after resource for executives, small business owners, nonprofits, educational institutions, and community leaders who are looking to expand their knowledge of AI ethics and leadership of responsible AI. For over 2 decades, she studied the science of business and technology influences on society while leading large-scale technology initiatives for Fortune 500 companies and various government organizations. As a scholar practitioner, Elizabeth has developed her expertise working with technical and non-technical leaders, creating alliances with community that translates theory into results. She also serves as the Global Chief AI Culture and Ethics Officer for Women in AI. Without further ado, please welcome Elizabeth Adams to talk about leadership of responsible AI, the case for inclusive tech. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that warm introduction. Super excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen so that we can get started. All right. Well, first off, again, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I bring you greetings from Minnesota. I wish it were actually springtime here, but I tried to dress a little springy because we've had snow for the past week. Nothing that sticks, but that's okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my work and my research, things that I have discovered and have been a part of for the past 5 years. But we're going to start with a quick video on what is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is the ability of a computer program or machine to think, learn, and perform tasks like humans, but at a much faster pace. Artificial intelligence is all around us, and we have all experienced AI in some way. For instance, AI is used to predict traffic patterns. It's also used as an option to unlock your mobile phone using facial recognition. In addition, streaming services such as Netflix use AI to make predictions about what movies or TV shows you may like. Behind these examples is a computer program powered by AI to predict who you are, what you may like, or as mentioned, how best to handle traffic. These are just a few examples of how AI is used in our world today. All right, so I am going to start here with something that I learned when I worked for various government organizations, and it's called starting with the bottom line up front, bluff. And we'll get to some really cool innovation stuff that's happening, and I'll talk about a couple of use cases as well. But I'm going to start here intentionally to highlight a real life community advocacy effort that represents work done as a result of second and third order consequences associated with discriminatory AI, meaning work that was done as a result of harmful AI landing in the community. And I'm going to end this presentation with ways that we can engage in responsible AI. So I'm a founding member of a former coalition called POSTME, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. And we formed early in 2020 to work on advocating for transparency, oversight, accountability, and equity in the technology use in the city of Minneapolis. And following the murder of George Floyd here, our work became particularly motivated by the urging of accountability and how law enforcement was using AI-enabled technology at their disposal. But POSTME did not come from a place of technophobia. Rather, our coalition was about embracing technology, but acting proactively so that when these tools were implemented, communities had trust that these tools were being used responsibly and not targeted towards certain populations. So in our work with PostMe, we drafted certain public oversight and transparency ordinances following these various surveillance tools. And we wanted to cover what we knew was being used in the city of Minneapolis, but also what might be coming. And as I mentioned before, after the murder of George Floyd, our coalition, along with city staff, the city attorney, and various city council members, determined it might be best to pull out facial recognition out of the ordinance and create a separate ordinance calling for its ban. And there were really 4 reasons for that. One, the vendor that the city of Minneapolis was using lacked some basic AI ethics principles. We weren't sure if they were even operationalized in their organization. And in fact, several large tech companies sent cease and desist letters, and those companies were Facebook and YouTube and Microsoft and Google. Second, there was a lack of transparency in how this particular technology was being trained by law enforcement and city staff. We were unsure of what the procurement process was and how it was actually being used. And then third, in February of 2020, the city of Minneapolis passed data privacy ordinances, which says if the city collects your data, they need to know, they have an obligation to tell you why, who's collecting it, how long, and what they're doing with it. And then fourth, in 2017, the city of Minneapolis established a racial equity division. And the purpose of this division was really to look across the city of Minneapolis's businesses to make sure that there was a racial equity lens placed on all of the activities. So these are 4 reasons why we decided mostly to pull out facial recognition in the ordinances to call for a ban. And the biggest result of our work happened on February 12th of 2021, when the Minneapolis City Council actually voted to ban it. And this is an example of what happens when society begins to advocate for itself when technology goes awry in their communities. But it's not the only case of AI creating discriminatory or prejudiced outcomes. This 3-year immersive experience with the community, with government, led me to a sort of an epiphany. Why not go back to what you really love, which is innovation? I am a futurist. To things that I love, such as technological advancements, and back into the space that could be most utilized for my skills. And that was leadership and speaking with executives and leaders in organizations about how they were actually developing technology. So with that said, I want to cover at a high level what I'm sure many of you understand, but it's what happens during the technology development lifecycle, to give us an idea of how we can all play a part in responsible AI and the leadership of responsible AI. So we just had a mini course on the path to oversight of surveillance technology in the city of Minneapolis. And we talked a little bit about what AI is, basically training a computer model to think like a human, but at a much faster pace. But basically, when you start a technology project, budgets are approved and technology teams are assigned. Then these teams and leaders begin with their requirements, concepts, and design sessions. You go through your development, you go through execution, testing, user acceptance testing, and you start working on possibly new versions. But in addition to that, you are involving other key stakeholders such as marketing, finance, legal, and customer care. And so when you reach this point in the product lifecycle, someone or a group of people have said, we have what we have, we need to move forward and take our product to market. And so it's really satisfying to be contributing to the advancement of technology. And at the end of the project, many of us celebrate our achievements and utilize these achievements to lobby for raises and promotions. And this is what normally happens at the start and in the middle and the end of the technology development lifecycle. So when it comes to innovation, I'm going to share a few of these new, pretty cool things that are coming out. And this is the kind of innovation that thrills some of us and that we can expect in the future. So Elon Musk presented his Tesla bot on August 19th of 2021, a humanoid robot that uses Tesla's vehicle AI and is intended to be pleasant, according to Musk. And it's being created with the intention of making us fall in love with it. And it can do dangerous or repetitive or monotonous types of activities that could be eliminated if we utilize the Tesla bot, like going to shop and get food. Although that duty might not be particularly hazardous, some of us might find it monotonous, dull. Also, on August 19th of 2021, Gail King and Mark Zuckerberg conducted their first ever virtual reality interview in Facebook's New Horizon work group, a VR tool that allows us as co-workers to communicate in virtual workspaces. But you need to use the Oculus headset from Facebook. And this will be like any other experience like we're having today, except could be discussing sensitive information in this environment in order for it to really work. And there's nothing wrong with innovation. I love innovation, as I've said, but I'd like to share another example with you as well. So at the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, robots served food at the media center. So robots would swing from the ceiling as people chose the foods that they wanted, and the robots would give them their meals while other robots would cook and prepare these meals. And so China developed this expertise by evaluating their consumer data, all types of data, participants, eating patterns, logistics, to use AI and robots to execute jobs that previously required humans to perform. And this may disrupt the service industry as the development of these technologies reduces the need for service jobs, but the technology still thrills some of us. So I'd like to turn your attention to, as we move into the portion of the presentation around responsible AI.
What is responsible AI? Imagine you're driving down the freeway. There's a slowdown up ahead, so you slow down. But what about after it clears up? Will you stay at a slow speed just in case at some point traffic slows down again? Of course not. You'll drive fast again, knowing that if you need to use the brakes, you will. Those brakes do for your car what responsible AI does for your business. It lets companies implement AI at scale with confidence. Knowing responsible AI can help avoid problems up ahead or even course correct, all by making transparent, trustworthy decisions. Companies using AI to help identify and recruit candidates run the risk of perpetuating inherent biases in the data, drawing on practices that might have skewed to one group or another in the past. But responsible AI can help them recruit and consider a broader pool of qualified candidates. We hope this was a fair representation of responsible AI.
All right, now I'd like to turn our attention to something else. So responsible AI is really the discipline that includes your governance framework, your policies, your procedures, your processes that guide the organization in addressing challenges found in from an ethical and legal point of view. But why should we really be concerned about responsible AI and inclusive tech through the AI development lifecycle? What is really happening that is causing this new business discipline to emerge? Well, the headlines on the right are a result of what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide. All of the resources, all of the time, all of the money allocated to work on AI initiatives through the technology development product lifecycle, only to end up with what's on the right. Only for technology to end up in societies where communities unite and sound the alarm, as I mentioned before. And there are many stories behind the headlines. You see, there's a different kind of development that's happening, as I mentioned. Advocacy development, process where you're educating the community, you're building your coalitions, you're educating industry and policymakers on why some of these AI-enabled technologies could be creating discriminatory outcomes. And which is why my work and my research, I believe the missing link is humane engineering that includes human dignity and human values, and the inclusion of the community experience as non-negotiable. In how technology is developed, how it's sold, and how it's used in cities across the world. This next example really motivated me to explore AI bias further, and it really pivoted my interest in my doctoral work, which is leadership in responsible AI. And as a part of the research conducted during that civic tech initiative, the post-me work, one of our researchers looked into various computer models to see if we could see if there were any errors in predictive labeling, which in this case is when an AI system makes a prediction about what may be in the image. And in this computer vision example, we used an online application that derives insights from your images to detect emotion, understand text, and more. And in both cases, in both of these images, an infrared a temperature is being taken with an infrared thermometer. But with the image on the left of the lighter skinned person and the lighter skinned hand, the algorithm predicts one set of labels: technology, electronic device, photography, and possibly a mobile phone, with a 68% probability that the image includes technology. But with the image of the darker skinned person and the darker skinned hand, the algorithm predicts and labels items in the photo as a gun, photography, firearm, and a plant, with an 88% probability that the image includes a gun. And this happens because of algorithmic bias, which is when there are errors in predictions and when there is a lack of diversity in the training data. And when that training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities and genders and ages, skin tones, associations, and possibly annotations. And this has been demonstrated to cause errors in predictive algorithms. But for now, let's take this one step further. In this example, one of our coalition members lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And as you can see, it did indeed change. Once the image was lightened, a gun was not predicted. What was predicted in the image was actually a hand. And so these are the types of technologies that are being sold or used by companies and law enforcement around the world. And law enforcement is using these tools to augment their work. Now, I do think that it is unfair to place the entire burden on algorithmic bias or algorithmic harms on one person or one group, such as data scientists. There needs to be an integrated ethical approach, which is inclusive tech design. So when you see these things I'm showing you, keep in the forefront of your mind that because of the absence of some sort of AI ethics, the standards, the processes, the procedures, and the values that guide technology development, everyday citizens are doing the work of calling these things out. And that is because the impacts to communities of color and vulnerable populations are just too great. And all of this was missed during the entire technology or product lifecycle, this lack of diverse or inclusive lens. This next example was something that was shared with me a week ago by a professor from the Van City School of Business, Technology, and Society. And I was granted permission to share this by both the school and Olusegun. It's a video of Olusegun, a former student experimenting with Python, OpenSea, and Keras in order to create a real-time face mask detector. And he posted his research and experiment in March of 22, and you are invited to examine it on his LinkedIn page. But he discovered after training the model that it was inaccurately predicting that he was wearing a face mask even when he wasn't. However, for his colleague, the predictions were actually accurate, both with different skin colors. To check to see if the model could make an accurate prediction, he tested it again using lighter makeup that was applied by his colleague. So he discovered that his deep learning model was constructed on a data set that represented a specific color, skin color, resulting in its inability to appropriately predict or on previously unseen data. Not that we're there yet, but it also underscores the importance of responsible AI, inclusive technology, and inclusive tech design. All the more, so now that as new emerging technology becomes reality, such as no-code AI or low-code AI, we don't run into the same types of algorithmic bias or harms. I want to highlight a few trends based on my research in AI and AI ethics over the past several years. But what I really want to highlight is the need for representation, especially as we continue to move through this year and into the next. And the future of work is a really, really hot topic. And leaders, managers, and governments are really learning how to have a human and AI agent workforce. What does that mean? For jobs, for training, for reskilling, for upskilling, for automation? So if you're looking for a place to kind of sink your expertise into, I would definitely advise that it could be the future of work. There's a real opportunity and a need for diverse voices, perspectives, and interests as we look into the future of work. Now, as we start to think about preparing for responsible AI, I'd like you to consider where in your organization your particular role might fit. It's in the people, process, technology, or even culture, and how you might begin or to continue to advocate for responsible AI. And I like this other visual because it basically gives you a place where you can pick any of these areas that you might have a passion for and explore and begin to investigate where you might fit and lead in responsible AI. So how do we help reduce bias found in not just data, but in the entire AI development lifecycle? As we begin to prepare for leadership of AI, I want to just kind of highlight a few things. And these first things are for you if you want to think about them from an organizational perspective. Accepting that responsible AI is an essential business function, just like legal, just like finance, accounting, customer care. All of these considerations need to be put in place for responsible AI. Ensure that there's broader acceptance and cultural change across your organization. And for my experience and research, executive sponsorship is key, and not just technical executive sponsorship, but also non-technical executive sponsorship. Forming cross-functional teams and building your RAI path. You'll need a diverse and inclusive governance team to integrate these diverse perspectives. And additionally, from an individual perspective, ask questions. This is actually how I got started in AI after 20 years of leading teams in software development. Back in 2018, I just started asking questions of data scientists based on what I was learning. And from that, I began to host learning events, such as what I'm mentioning here, and connecting with STEAM or STEM organizations, sharing again all of what I was learning, finding out who else might have a passion for this particular field of AI. Connecting with your local commission and board. That was something that I did as well, and I would advise that. There are many open spots on these commissions and boards across cities where they're looking for expertise from industry to help guide and shape how cities move forward as they begin to adopt artificial intelligence. And finally, follow your curiosity. This is the biggest thing for me. There's so many different ways to play a part in responsible AI, but I would highly advise that you follow your curiosity. And I'd like to end by saying thank you. And also that I love to educate different generations. I feel it's critical as we're all adjusting to these new AI agents and humans living and working together. So I wrote this book to help parents and caregivers talk to children about safe technology. And it was an amazing passion project, and I'm grateful that it's been well received. And that's it for me. I want to say thank you to everyone for allowing me to share a bit of my research and my work. Thank you for the invitation, and I'll turn it back over to you, and I look forward to taking questions.
Oh, thank you so much. We are going to take questions in the Keynote Slack channel. If everybody is in Slack, please type your questions there, and I will ask them immediately.
It's okay if there are no questions.
People are typing. I sent the message too late. Yeah, there's several people are typing messages. Yeah, it takes a while. All right. Okay, so we have a first question. Which areas in REI have improved, in the responsible AI, have improved the most, and which areas do you see as being the most concerning today?
That's a great question. Before it became responsible AI was AI ethics, and there was a lot of focus on the technical teams. So the technical teams have actually gotten a head start over the last, I'll say, 3 years with implementing different ways to mitigate bias, whether those are model cards or whether they're using some other type of toolkit or checklist. I would say the technical teams have actually gotten a start. What I think has happened over the last couple years is that executives are finding that it really is their responsibility to kind of shape and guide responsible AI and help change the culture. And that started with technical executives who were the ones that were influencing the budgets and processes and so forth. What I'm excited about is I'm starting to see, oops, got a little flyaway up there. What I'm excited about is that I'm starting to see non-technical leaders, teams, managers, all interested in what responsible AI is and what that looks like for their organization. And as I mentioned, one of the things that I try to do is just encourage people to go and research about what it is, because every culture and every organization will adopt, could possibly adopt their own version just to get started. And so I hope that answered the question. Started with the technical teams, technical leaders, and now it's branching out and cascading across the organization.
All right, so we have a question from Martin Snyder, who is one of our planners. Is there anyone working on creating less biased training data sets in any category? How exactly would someone approach that?
Oh, that's a good question. I know that I have a colleague that is working on something similar to that, and it's Sid Technologies. And it's a startup, and what she's working on is she wants to be able to correct it real time. So maybe not so much from the data set perspective, but once it launches, how can we correct whether it's language or something else that could possibly be creating discriminatory outcomes. I'll have to do some more research on that in terms of people. Yes, I think that there are. I just don't have the names at the top of my head.
Okay, cool. One comment is isn't equally biased a better approach than less biased? There will always be bias. I'm not sure if that's true.
I don't know what equally biased means, and I will just say this: whether it's less biased, whether it's equally biased, I think what we need to understand is that those communities that are being harmed, they could care less what we call it, because they're the ones that are sitting on the other side of discriminatory outcomes of AI, and they're the ones that we need to think about. So hopefully, and maybe that person can re-clarify their question, but that's the reason why I got involved in the community, is because of biased outcomes. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that is kind of sad because people expect computers to be so impartial. They expect them to be fair. And it's sad to say that they're not when we train our systems.
Some of them are not, but some of them could be, and that's why.
All right, so next question from Robert Hansen. Besides bias of skin color, are you seeing bias on other variables?
Yes, so the slide that I had up that talks about what happens when our societies collide and our technology worlds collide had a number of different examples. One is exam proctoring. So there's bias in terms of people who have different physical abilities that are being accused of cheating because the models were not trained on people who might live or work in a wheelchair. There's hiring bias. We talked about that particular headline, where there have been some resumes that have been excluded because of biased resume algorithms and sifting algorithms. Vaccination distributions that were based on, I think there was that Stanford case that I used that allowed the executives to get to the front of the line instead of front workers. So there are other types of bias or exclusionary types of things that are happening with AI, the algorithms.
Excellent. Okay, so do we have a question from Gary Sealing, another one of our organizers? For the advocacy efforts you described in the beginning, did you find software vendors or procurement were responsible for the idea of responsible AI?
I did not. So that's a super, super great question. We weren't back in 2018, 2019, when I started working with the city of Minneapolis, we were not even thinking about responsible AI. We didn't, at that time, we really just wanted to ensure public oversight and transparency of the tools that were being used. It wasn't until we got further into the work and started understanding who some of the vendors were that we started looking on their website to see if they had AI ethics principles, to see if there was any information in the news about how they were being careful with creating their algorithms, was there public trust, and so forth. So it didn't start specifically at that time. It also actually started for me when I started doing additional work through my fellowship at Stanford, the first fellowship, the Race to Tech Fellowship, and now as an affiliate fellow, kind of really understanding what is this responsible AI thing and why do we need it? But it did not start in the advocacy work.
Okay, we have a question from a former organizer and a speaker, Audrey Trout. With the increasing role that AI is likely to play in our lives, should we be advocating for legislation or industry standards to hold companies accountable for responsible AI?
Yes,
Agree.
yes, 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 and more yes. And here's why. I know that I work with a lot of executives who want to do the right thing, and they are attempting to do the right thing. They have AI ethics principles. They have principles that the employees are signing. They have diverse work groups who are participating in AI development, but they are far and few between. And so with this rush to get to the market, to be the first to disrupt market, whether it's through digital transformation or some other AI tool, we are leaving responsible AI up to these large tech companies and providers. I do think that there needs to be some government regulation associated with that to kind of usher in some accountability, because if we left it up to them, to themselves, we can see what's happening now, which is you have communities continuing to trade off time with their families to advocate for what should be a basic human right, and that's safe technology.
And I guess people will cop out because I didn't do this, the computer did this.
Yeah.
How can technology providers best incorporate responsible AI into data science tooling? Thinking of AI training frameworks, tools that check for bias in training. What companies are doing this well?
Okay, so great question. I'm going to answer the second part of it first and then get back to the first part. So I tend to say that I think Microsoft is doing it well. They have a whole responsible AI team. They have been out front doing a good job of telling us what they're doing, how they're incorporating responsible AI. So they're building this trust in the community. Salesforce is another one. I have colleagues there. I've seen some of the work that they're doing. They're again out front. They actually have someone that's pretty senior on their team that participates in, I forgot what it was, oh, shoot, the US Chamber of Commerce in ensuring that all types of companies can participate in AI responsibly. So whether it's small business or not. So these are the companies that have done a really good job of integrating, I think, the community perspective. The second part of that is there's a lot of guidelines out there. United Nations has guidelines on how to implement responsible AI, principled AI, AI ethics. World Economic Forum, I just showed a video of Accenture. There are lots of companies that have tools. I would suggest that a company kind of investigate that to figure out which tool might be best for you. There are some companies that move like a ship and it takes them a while to turn. It takes a while for responsible AI to become a practice in their organization. And then there are some organizations that move like a speedboat and they can adopt them rather quickly. So I would suggest that and invite folks to kind of do some research on what tools might be best.
All right, now we have an interesting literary question. Is there a movie or a book about a dystopian future that you feel is a realistic and terrifying possibility?
Yes, and I think it's called Time with Justin Timberlake. And that movie kind of scared me because if I'm thinking about it correctly, you have to have some goods in order to pay for more time to live. And so it's a really scary movie about the haves and the have-nots. It's a movie about these tech providers that have all this data on people. They know where you are, they know where you live, they know what your balance is, and they create all of these unreasonable expectations for you. You still have to get up and go to work. You're still trying to struggle to eat, but then you still have to pay for time to live. And so that scared me. But even before I got into AI ethics, it's been one of those things that I thought about when I first got into it. I'm like, oh gosh, I hope we don't ever get here.
Yeah, that does sound scary. I love Justin Timberlake. I'm going to watch that. How does responsible, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one, I'll get to it. How does the responsible AI relate to generative adversarial networks? How does it deal with malicious, natural, as well as artificial intelligences? This is dealing with like fake news, sarcasm, deception. Like there's people using AI for bad things out there.
Yeah, so I'm not a super technical people, but what I will say is responsible AI helps put the guardrails in place so that some of those things can be uncovered during the life cycle of your technology product life cycle. That's what responsible AI does. It puts the guardrails, it puts the frameworks, the policies, the procedures. It helps you understand who is doing what is audibility, what is explainability. So that's what responsible AI does. It helps you to, like I said, capture hopefully capture some of those things in your process. So I don't think that responsible AI as a discipline is going to hone in on one particular model bias or structural bias or societal bias. It's supposed to work across the entire life cycle. So like I said, it can help catch some of those things.
Have you seen any bias in the military in terms of like non-social but political bias?
I don't know if I would answer that because I'm not sure how that fits with the work that I do, which is
Fair.
leadership of responsible AI in organizations. Yeah, I might have missed that.
That's fair. So for companies which have not considered responsible AI, what is the economic argument for them to make this a priority?
Oh, I'm just starting to research a number of those things. And so I think that there are demonstrated cases of how when you tie impacted stakeholders or impacted groups to innovation as stakeholders, there is an economic benefit because you get community trust, you get society trust, word of mouth, people will buy your product, people will trust your product. And so it's very similar to the economic benefits of having diverse perspective, diverse leaders. You're bringing in different ideas for innovation. And so that's what I can share. And that's what I've been able to discover so far.
All right. I see that
These
Andrea,
are great questions.
you were worried that we didn't have any questions. It's just,
I love it.
just the moderator who didn't send the message fast enough.
I wasn't worried.
I actually put in like the here at Slack, but it didn't take for some reason. I think somebody turned it off. Somebody was typing, Andrea was typing something. I'm waiting to see if anybody else has a question. But this is fascinating.
And these are really, really good questions. Every time I present, I get a whole different set of questions, and all of these questions inform my work going forward. So yeah, keep them coming, and thank you for that, because it really helps me, kind of understand where I can go next in terms of exploration.
All right, let's see. As we enter the Web3 world, the multiverse, the metaverse, XR, and Web2 companies, do you think companies will get desperate and throw ethics out the window?
I do. There is so to someone's last point about the economics of responsible AI and what does that mean, there's also a counter thought that if you put too much ethics into something, you'll slow down innovation, and people would rather go to market because they're like, if we stand back and we do all of this ethics stuff, then someone else will get out there with a similar product. So there is that kind of school of thought. Again, when you're talking about humans, and I think we need to really place this conversation back with the human aspect. When you're talking about humans and the impacts that they might have, the fact that they might not be able to get their money because of some banking glitch, or the fact that they might not be getting the right health treatment because some algorithm is predicting a different treatment for them because of the way it was trained on certain data. I think we need to really just think about the impacts to humans. And do we really want to continue having these social and technology worlds collide? And why can't we have humane engineering in our AI, specifically if these AI technologies touch society? So hopefully that answered that.
We have another great question from Martin. Do you personally use free services like Gmail and others that package and sell personal data, or do you avoid them? Is it even possible to stay out of that part of the world?
That's a great question. As a person who loves technology and who considers themselves a futurist, I tend to go with the early adoption stuff, and I do sign up for those things. But I also have been on Facebook for a very, very long time. And so I know for me, once I started getting into researching this, I knew that there was no way I could pull back all the stuff that I've shared. So from my perspective, case personally, yes, I am using some of these technologies. And as I mentioned before, even with the coalition, we don't come from a place of technophobia, just want it to be used or designed and developed responsibly, so that my data is protected, your data is protected, and so that we can actually have fun with technology. And honestly, that's a great question, because I really wish that I could spend most of my time on thinking about strategizing ways to bring about new technologies and spending my time innovating. The days of old for me. But because there are so very few of us talking about AI bias and AI harms, I feel like this is where I need to be right now.
Excellent. All right, we still have a little bit of time left. So if anybody has any more questions, please type them in. I see people are typing, but I'm not sure if they're typing in the, Martin is working on the question. So we know we have.
Where are you? Are you watching in Slack, or you are?
I am in Slack. I'm in Slack in the Keynote channel. That's where the questions appear.
Gotcha.
I read them out loud for the recording.
Yeah, well, while we're waiting, I would like to invite others to connect with me on LinkedIn, share some additional questions that you might have. Happy to, kind of extend this conversation there, because again, like I said, I really, really want to take this feedback in, these questions, and kind of explore where they might be helpful. Because I am pursuing, as I mentioned, my doctorate in leadership and responsible AI. And so I'm looking across organizations and looking at organizations who are trying to incorporate diverse perspectives, trying to incorporate these policies, these procedures with a diverse stakeholder group within their organization. And so it's all very fascinating for me. And so, yeah, I just want to offer that if people want to connect on LinkedIn.
Okay, cool. So Tracy has a question. I also have, I'm going to ask my question too. So Tracy asks, we asked this in your podcast, but should we teach ethics courses for software developers?
Yes, Tracy, that's an amazing question. And yes, yes. I think it's very important. I have had the pleasure of guest lecturing for a number of computer science courses. And it's amazing when you see the light bulb go off for computer scientists or future computer scientists or in computer science classes, when they never thought about the second and third order consequences of what could possibly be happening with the work or what they're learning. And so I absolutely think that's important. I'm seeing a lot more of that, which is really great. And yes, we need to continue. There's also a course at Pepperdine where I'm at, which is a master's course. It's called Responsible AI. I guest lectured there. It's not a computer science course, but it is a course for an MBA. And I thought that was highly effective, because those are current leaders and also future leaders who will be tackling some of these problems in the future. So yes.
Beautiful campus, Pepperdine.
Thank you.
right on the ocean. So my question is are there AI tools that people can use to check their own biases, like human biases? So for example, when you're hiring something, are there tools that you can use to say, am I being biased against this person because I don't think they're qualified, or am I being biased because of my personal biases?
There are, and that particular work that you're talking about started when the whole diversity and inclusion work started some 20 years ago. But today, there's actually an equity fluent leadership toolkit that I would invite people to check out. And it was produced by UC Berkeley, their gender and race studies. And that one I actually like to kind of work through with executives and leaders about how bias can creep in, but it also talks about why we need to have equity fluent leadership. So I would suggest checking that out.
Berkeley. Okay, got it. Data analytics is working hard to ruin just about every sport in existence. Are you worried that AI systems will optimize other aspects of life to the point where they lose the elements that made them interesting in the first place?
I think that's a really good question. And that's where I think all of us can play a part in helping to kind of balance this thing. We're not there yet, but we need to. It's one of the reasons why I think labs are so important, where people get a chance to play and experiment and explore without really causing too much harm to communities or to people. I think that's a great question for a lab. Many years ago, I ran a systems integration lab, and we brought all of these fascinating tools in to work together to see if they could work together. And if they couldn't, unfortunately, they left, but we brought in new tools. And so we don't do enough lab work. It's usually these industry companies, technology companies that are going off building their own stuff and not figuring out how it plays well with other things. And I think that there's an opportunity to kind of bring in the considerations for human values, human-centered AI, but also this exploratory, the exploratory pieces of what AI can do for us.
Okay, so Peter Tittle asks, I think of Web2 ethos as you are the product, kind of like we live in the matrix. Web3 ethos is about empowerment. You are in control. How do we tap into Web3 ethos and get people to care about ethical AI?
Ooh, I'm not sure. I don't know if I have the best answer for that, other than to invite people to first understand what AI ethics is, and then to investigate for themselves how to bring that into the metaverse conversation. I know that there are a lot of conversations. This conversations about things that are happening from an unethical perspective in the metaverse. But I actually would like to ask Peter how he might, if he could just plug into the chat, how he might go about that. So I want to suggest that this conversation is an exchange and that we're helping each other. And so I haven't spent a lot of time there because so much of my work is still focused with executives who are still trying to adopt responsible AI in their own worlds. And they haven't tapped just yet into Web.3, but that's a good question. But if Peter could come back and tell us what his thoughts were, that'd be great.
Probably a good idea to teach that ethics class so people can do a bottom-up approach as well. Sometimes.
Are you signing up for that, Mark?
I actually had the fortune of taking an ethics class at Drexel University a very long time ago.
Oh, okay. What'd you think?
There was no AI, but
Okay.
it was one of my favorite classes. It really made me think about the consequences of what we do. And the consequences of certain decisions the government makes as well.
Yeah, business ethics is huge. That's where I play a little bit about. I started in AI ethics, and now I'm going across the organization and talking about business ethics. And one of the things I'm focusing on in my research is broadening stakeholder involvement in the construction of AI artifacts and the AI discussion across the entire organization. So yeah, that's where I am these days.
All right, we have 10 minutes left, so probably 3 or 4 more questions. So I have John asking, do we know enough at this point for governments to try to codify the regulation around responsible AI? At what level would you expect them to meaningfully regulate?
We do.
Who should a responsible government engage to write meaningful laws?
We do have enough information. I think the last 5 years can tell us all of the different use cases where we've seen AI go awry. So there are enough use cases. But what I will say from my own experience in the government is that many of them are not technologists. Many of them are waking up to technology bias. They're beginning to think about it as we move into smart cities. And so there's this huge education piece that has to happen. And then at the city level, people are being voted in, they're being voted out every couple of years, right? So now you have a new set of people coming on. So that's been that's a particular challenge in government in general, is that you have new folks coming in. You don't necessarily know what their idea is about or their perspectives around technology. And so I do think at the very least, if a government is using technology, using AI-enabled technology in their cities, they should be paying particular attention to that and have some sort of ethical standards. I also think that if a company is creating AI-biased outcomes or harms at a global level, national level, then you need to have those governing bodies involved if they're not doing the right things themselves. So I think there are many different places for governments to play if these technology companies, as we mentioned before, are not taking it upon themselves to be trustworthy and transparent and explainable in what they're doing, but at all levels.
All right, and let's see, are there standards around transparency, provenance, explainability for verifying responsible AI claims?
I don't know if I understand that one.
I guess, can people actually show how the AI is like doing its work? I guess that's what they're trying.
Yes, and there are companies that are doing that. Whether or not they want to do that is one thing. But yeah, that's when your governance and your frameworks, your governance and your frameworks come in, because let's just think about the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have a framework that you can use for AI. We have all these checks and balances. What I think is equally important is making sure that you have diverse perspectives on those teams who could possibly catch something while you are doing your auditing of your AI systems. So when you set up your governance frameworks and you're going through your different checks, you should be able to say, this model does this, or this process does this, or this document does this, and you have your internal auditing, as well as there are now some companies that are doing external auditing, just like you would with cybersecurity. So yes, there are those things that are available.
Excellent. And then the last question is, there's a growth of AI usage in the military for warfare. How do we ensure responsible AI there? I guess that's just a starting out.
Yeah, so from my understanding, there are several government organizations that are either hiring chief responsibility officers, chief AI ethics officers. They're adopting some frameworks, or they're at least pulling together groups that will begin to work on that. So very similar to what has happened in the industry space, as I mentioned before, because government leaders typically are not technologists, it takes a while for them to do that. But at least here in the US, and I believe in other parts of the world, the UK and Canada, excuse me, these chief responsibility officers, AI ethics officers are now starting to fill some of these roles, starting to build their teams and starting to reach out to academia and industry, as well as civil society, for insights on how to build the best platforms.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful keynote, Elizabeth Adams. Please follow her on Twitter at technology Liz. That's her nick on Twitter. Tracy typed it in, LinkedIn, and all of the social networks. Yeah, this is a really interesting topic, and we definitely need to do more of this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Mark, for moderating this. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Becca. Thank you all for the invitation.